Hey guys, thanks for hanging out with me today. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these cornhole boards. Come with me. I started by cutting this 1/2 inch sheet of plywood in half. This is too awkward to do on the table saw, so I used my poor man's track saw, i.e. my circular saw and a jig. Works great. After I cut it in half, I also trimmed the other ends, so I would have a nice fresh edge on both ends. I then took to the table saw and cut both pieces to width, again cutting both sides for a nice clean edge. After that, I cut my 2x4s to length. Next, I ran them over my jointer. This served a couple of purposes. One, it removed the rounded corners, and B, it gave me one flat face and one flat and perpendicular edge. I could then run the lumber through my planer flat face down, which made the other face flat and parallel to the first. And finally, I took the boards to the table saw to cut them to final width, making all 4 sides flat and square to each other. Next, I temporarily clamped the sides to the top so I could get an accurate measurement for the end pieces. I then cut them to length at the miter saw. Lastly, I pre-drilled and countersunk holes for the screws on the ends of the side pieces. Using exterior grade glue, I screwed the frames together. Next, I glued and brad nailed the tops to the frames and then clamped both boards together to help keep them stay flat as the glue dried. Next, I turned my attention to creating the whole part of the cornhole boards. Now, according to the American Cornhole Association regulations and standards, yes, that's a thing, a regulation cornhole is 6 inches in diameter, 9 inches down, and 12 inches in from both sides. Now, I don't have a 6-inch hole saw, so I employed a neat little trick using 2 routers. I started with a 2-inch hole saw and then using a 1/2 inch rabbiting bit in one router and a flush trim bit in a second router, I incrementally enlarged the hole by 1 inch. Or so I thought. Turns out my 1/2 inch rabbiting bit doesn't actually make 1/2 inch rabbets, but rather something closer to 7/16, which resulted in a 5.5 inch hole rather than a 6-inch hole. So I actually did it all again, starting this time with a 2.5 inch hole saw. By the way, if you're interested in how I made that router table, click the link in the top right corner of your screen or in the description down below. Next, everything got a round over. And yes, I'm aware of the redundancy of going through all that work earlier just to get rid of the round overs, just to add them back now, but these are different round overs. They're my round overs. Next, I filled the holes left by the brad nails and screws. Now, the recipient birthday boy apparently is a Chiefs fan. I don't know why either. I'm just kidding. I don't know anything about baseball. Go Leafs, go, or whatever. In any case, the client asked to have the Kansas City Chiefs logo engraved. So I did the name around the hole and then the arrowhead logo down below. Then I gave everything a final sanding with 220 grit. Now it was time to cut out the hole. I traced the jig I made, then cut the hole out with a jigsaw, staying close to the line. Then, using a pattern bit and a router, cut the hole to final size. A round over and some hand sanding to finish it up. The client also wanted the boards painted red and white. I forgot to film the painting it white, but it's the same procedure as the red. Tape and roll paint. Pretty simple. Once the paint dried, I could apply the clear coat. Both paint and the clear poly are exterior grade. I did 3 coats on both top and bottom. After the poly had dried, I went over everything with some brown paper. Now the brown paper works like a super high grit sandpaper and just smooths out all the little bumps and imperfections. Last things to make were the legs. I cut them oversized and marked a semicircle at one end. I then nipped off the corners at the miter saw. And then did the final shaping at the belt sander. And while I was there, I also cleaned up the edges. I hate it when people use 2x material and don't sand off the stamps. Am I the only one? Leave me a comment down below. Next, at the drill press, I pre-drilled the legs for the bolts that will hold them to the boards. I then used the legs and a brad point drill bit to mark the location of the bolts on the sides of the boards. I then moved that mark about 1/8 of an inch down and back so that the leg wouldn't bind at any point while it was being rotated. After I drilled the holes, I lightly attached one leg. Next, with the one leg dangling off the side of my bench, I propped the board up so that the top sat at 12 inches and marked the final length and angle of the leg. I then matched that angle, whatever it was, over at the miter saw and cut the legs to the final length. And after I gave the freshly cut ends a quick sanding, I then also clear coated the legs with 3 coats all around. With the legs dry, I began final assembly. Now I'm using carriage bolts for a cleaner look and nylon insert lock nuts so that the nuts stay in place and don't back out after repeated use. Now using carriage bolts with those lock nuts in softwood can cause problems as the carriage bolt has a tendency to spin out. What I find helps is to thread the nut onto a bolt prior to using them so as to cut a thread into the nylon, making it easier to then thread onto the carriage bolt. It'll still keep the nut in place, but it won't be so tight as to turn the bolt with it. Finally, I determined the approximate center of gravity of the completed board and attach a handle at that position. And there you have it, a custom engraved and painted set of cornhole boards. Hope you liked this video, and as always, thanks for watching.